Hey everyone, it's Vanessa. I hope you guys are having a great weekend. I wanted to do a quick video to share a relatively quick tutorial with you guys. My son is 6 and he is in the stage of losing teeth. So I remember back when I first started sewing, tooth fairy pillows were really big, or I used to see them all over the place, and I used to make them quite often. I haven't made one in years, but my son lost another tooth a couple of days ago, so I did make a tooth fairy pillow for him, and it was really fun and it was really quick, and it's a good alternative to having to put the teeth under the pillow for the tooth fairy, and the tooth fairy sometimes in the dark maybe is not able to easily find the tooth. So this way you can just put the tooth in the little tooth fairy pillow and problem solved. So you don't really need too much stuff. I'm gonna move this down here so you can see. It's a really good project for a minimal amount of fabric. You really just need, it's actually five things total. You need a main fabric, and I actually found this really cute. It's actually tooth fabric, so I'm going to use that for the main piece, and it doesn't need to be very big. I mean, it can really be any size that you want, but this piece is pretty small. It's actually about like 8.5 inches by about 6 inches, so not too big at all. And then you also need a piece of fabric for the reverse side, so I'm just using this solid blue. And then you need 2 pieces to make the little tooth pocket, pretty small as well. Also, I would say about 2 by 2. And then lastly, you need something to hang the pillow. I used to just use ribbon. You can really use anything. If you have some cute like fold over elastic, you can use that. I did not have ribbon, but I did have bias tape. So I just cut a piece of bias tape. It's probably about 10 inches. It doesn't have to be very long. I stitched the opening because bias tape is open, but you don't have to. I just did it it doesn't take too long. I just did it to do it. And actually one last thing, the 6th thing you'll need is the stuffing that you'll need to stuff the pillow. So the first thing you have to do is you have to construct the little pocket, because you will need to sew the pocket onto the main fabric before you create the pillow. And you just take the main side of the fabric, and then you take the reverse fabric and you just put right sides together, and then you just go to your sewing machine and you stitch down all the 3 main sides. So you would stitch side, side, top, and then at the bottom you do need to leave a little opening so that you can flip it inside out. Okay, once you have sewn the pocket, you do need to turn it inside out, which I've already done. If you have one of these little sticks to poke into the corners, just to make the corners nice and corner-like, use it, or whatever tool you have to do that. Just, you know, do your best to get the corners to be nice and turned out. And then you're going to have this square, and then on the bottom you're going to have an opening. So you do need to sew that shut. And then what I do is I just will turn the raw edges inside, and then I will give it an iron. So I do have my iron handy. Anytime I do any type of sewing projects, I always have my iron handy, because you will almost always need your iron. So then once I iron it nice and flat, then I will go back to my machine and do a little quick top stitch, and the top stitch will seal the bottom opening shut. Okay, so once you top stitch, you should end up with a little square just like this. Now the next step is you will need to sew this onto your main fabric before you sew the main fabric and the reverse fabric together. Because if you sew the reverse and the main together before you sew the pocket on, it's gonna be hard to sew the pocket on after the fact. You might have to undo and redo. So it seems super logical, but believe me, I have many times forgotten about that step and have had to break out my seam ripper, seam rip everything, and start over. So anyway, in this case, you can really position the pocket anywhere. I am going to position it maybe in this case because the fabric has a little tooth fairy. So I'm gonna sew the pocket right next to the tooth fairy part, so it looks like she's sprinkling some little magical tooth fairy dust. So just position the pocket wherever it is that you want it to end up, and then you can take a pin and just pin it in place. Usually like to do it right in the, it's such a tiny pocket, so you are going to have to shift the pin around a little bit. And then what you'll do is you will just sew the pocket directly onto the main print, just not at the top. So just remember, don't sew the top because you need that to be open because that is where the tooth is going to go. So you're going to sew down the side, the bottom, and the opposite side, and just make sure you do a little back stitch on the first side and the second side just to reinforce that pocket. Okay, so now that you've sewn the pocket on, it will look like this, and it's just a little pocket for the tooth. The last thing you have to do before you make this into an actual pillow is you need to take the ribbon, or in this case the bias tape I'm using for the handle. You need to make sure you sew that onto the main fabric as well. So if there's a wrong side to whatever you're using, like in my case, the bias tape, I'm using the back side of the tape is this part that I'm going to pin onto my main fabric, and then that way when you turn it inside out, the right side will be showing. It actually doesn't really matter, so just whatever you decide to do. What you're going to do is you're going to take 2 pins and pin it to the main fabric. As far as positioning, it really just is wherever you want to put it. I would say measure about 1.5 inches to 2 inches from the corner, and then that's where you can pin it. And then do the same thing with the other side. This isn't a very long piece of bias tape. It's about 10 inches, but it can really be as long as you would like it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and pin the other side as well. So it's going to just look like this. You're going to go back to the machine and you're going to give it some good rows of stitching there at the top. It's probably just, depending on your seam allowance, the seam allowance that you're going to use to sew the pillow, it should be maybe 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. So in my case, it's looking like maybe more a 1/4 inch. So I'm just gonna sew the handles into place with maybe 2 or 3 good rows of stitching about 1/4 inch from the edge of the fabric. Okay, so after you stitch the handle on, it'll look kind of like this. It's not gonna be pretty, and it doesn't have to be. So these ended up being about 1.5 inches away from the corners. I did end up measuring it. It's just if you don't have a measuring tape or something to measure, it's fine. You can eyeball it, but it does help if you do, just because, you know, it'll be less seam ripping later. So once you've got the handle sewn on, the pocket sewn on, then what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give this a quick press with the iron, you know, just to make sure it looks nice and crisp. You don't have to, but my fabric has a few wrinkles in it, so I'm just gonna iron. And then I'm gonna make sure that the handle is flat, so it's not gonna lay perfectly flat, but just as flat as you can get it. And then you want to take the reverse fabric, and then you're just going to place the reverse fabric right over the main fabric. And like I said, the handle is going to be a little bit bunched up, but it's okay. So you have it like this, and then I would recommend pinning it, or if you have little clips like this, then you can use that. I actually don't have my pins handy, but I do have some of these little Wonder clips, so I'm just going to go ahead and use those. So you just want to pin it or clip it just down the sides. You probably don't need a lot of clips, but just enough to keep it nice and nice and sturdy, and so you don't want the fabric sliding around too much. I mean, I'm using cotton, and you could really use anything, but I would recommend cotton, so it's really not going to slide around that much. But anyway, so you want to pin it or wonder clip it all the way around, and then on the bottom, I'm probably not going to pin it, but because what you have to do is you have to sew, but you do need to leave room to flip this inside out. So what you're going to do on the bottom is you're going to sew it from the corner to about here, you know, to a few inches, and then just do a back stitch, and same thing on the other side. You're going to sew it from the corner to 2 or 3 inches, and then do a back stitch, and you want to leave the bottom open because you're going to have to turn it inside out. Okay, so I sewed the pillow together. Now, just a couple things to remember. You want to make sure that you backstitch on all of the corners, and that you backstitch again at the opening because you want it to be reinforced. I also did a little bit of a backstitch over the part where the handle is, and it's not necessary again, but just, you know, just a little extra. And then what I normally like to do as well is just trim the corners. Just make sure you do not cut the stitching, because then you're going to have a hole and you're going to need to go back and you know, stitch it back together again. But you just want to remove some of the bulk. If you have any excess bulk on your pillow sides, then you might want to trim. I have a little bit here, so you might want to trim that as well. So just getting that out. There's a little bit of excess here where the handles are, so I'm going to trim that off. And now I'm ready to turn my pillow inside out. So I left a pretty decent size hole to where I could get my hand in. So I'm going to go ahead and just flip it inside out. So it shouldn't be hard. Just really make sure that that opening is large enough for you to be able to easily flip it inside out. And then again with the turner, these actually come, if you've ever bought bags of polyfill, they usually come inside of the bag. That's where I got this one. But I think you can just use a chopstick if you have that. Even sometimes I've used like a pen or pencil. I wouldn't recommend it, but you know, if you can get one of these, that's fine. I'm sure they have a ton of options on Amazon or wherever, you know, you can usually get your sewing stuff. Anyway, so you just use the side that's more pointy, and you put it into the corners to make sure that they're nice and pointy, just as best you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, this is for your child or a relative, it's fine. So now you should have a little pillow unstuffed. Again, this isn't very big, and then you've got the handle. So super cute, right? And then the bottom, you still have to stuff it. So I did go and grab some polyfill. It's not the prettiest, but it looks like this. And really, you can stuff your pillow to be as stuffed as you want. You do remember that you're going to have to sew the bottom shut, so you don't want it to be too overstuffed, because then it's going to be really tough to sew it closed. So you just take the polyfill, and usually what I like to do whenever I'm making a pillow and I'm using polyfill is I like to go to let me get that out of the way. I like to go to the corners first, and I kind of shove the polyfill into the corners just as best as I can. I do the corners first, all 4, and then I will go back and fill at the center. So that's kind of what I'm doing here, just trying to make sure that the corners have that they're nice and full. So stuff. And then you'll kind of have, it'll be mostly good to go, and then it's kind of empty in the center, so I'll just add a little bit more polyfill just to kind of make it a little bit more pillowy. But again, don't overstuff because you're going to have to sew it shut. So just kind of use your best judgment. I think for this one, I think we are good. So now I'm going to go back and just sew it closed. So then all you would need to do is just kind of with your fingers form a little you want the hem to be, you don't want any raw edges showing. So what you can do is you can just, you're gonna fold the two raw edges towards each other, and then you can pin it, or you can get an iron and, you know, kind of just make it so that you have an idea of where, you know, how you need to sew it. But you want it to look like this. You want it to just have no raw edges showing, and then you just do that all along the bottom, and then you sew it closed, and then that'll be that. Okay, so I sewed the pillow shut, and now what you want to do is just trim any excess threads. There's usually a few at the opening, and then just kind of check it to see if there's any other threads hanging around. Like I have one, a little one here on the pocket. And you just want to trim everything down. And then what I like to do is just take a lint roller and kind of lint roll, get all the excess threads off. And there you go. Now you have a super cute Tooth Fairy pillow for your kids or a child that is in the tooth losing stage. These make great gifts. They're fun, they're cheap, and everybody usually loves them. Okay, I hope you guys liked this video, and hopefully we'll be doing some more in the future. See you next time. Bye.